Cameron, this has been a long time in coming. I really appreciate you making time to be on the podcast today.
Of course. Great to see you again.
So I think as a jumping off point, people have heard your bio. They understand you've got quite an incredible business career around the world. I think the thing I'm curious for you to share about is more about what drove you down this path to be so focused and specialized around, particularly around not just COOs, but the relationship between a COO and a CEO, and how pivotally important that is to a company's success, so much so that you decided to start the COO Alliance.
Yeah, so I guess it goes back to a couple of points. One, I had played the COO role a couple of times. I was the COO for 1-800-GOT-JUNK. I had been the second in command for a private currency company. And then I'd been the second in command for the franchising group for what's called Boyd Auto Body and Glass now in Gerber Auto Collision. So I'd played the role a couple of times, and I recognized that the COO is very different from the CEO. So that was the first. Second, I'd been in a lot of these entrepreneurial groups. I'd been in the Genius Network for 8 years. I'd been in Strategic Coach for 7 years, Entrepreneurs Organization for 5, yada, yada, a whole bunch of different groups I'd been in. And I recognized there were a lot of these communities for these second in command or for the CEOs, but there was really nowhere for those COOs to connect and collaborate and grow their skills and confidence. And then I was coaching a couple of YPO members companies. One is now a 2,000 person company. I coached them from 40 people up to 300. And their COO asked me if I could get together a group of my clients' second in commands and if they could mastermind together. And I was like, well, I don't really coach any other COOs. And he said, well, that's funny because you're also coaching Zach Obrant from Book in a Box, and you're also coaching Matt Wolf from Acceleration Partners. I'm like, how do you even know those guys? He said, well, you used to talk about them on our coaching calls. So I reached out to their CEO, and I'm like, all right, that's ridiculous. So I put up a 1-page landing page. This is 8 years ago. And I said, if we can get 10 COOs together in Scottsdale for 2.5 days, everybody pays $7,000, we'll all mastermind together. And 25 hours later, 10 people had paid. I'm like, well, that's interesting. We have a market. And then at the end of the 3 days, 9 of the 10 wanted to continue meeting. So it was really this, it wasn't like I was trying to do anything and sell it. There was a need for it. And we just, decided to kind of go after it. And then, I guess over the first few years, we kind of tripped and fell a bunch of times. We were trying to figure out how to market a community for COOs and keep it similar to the CEO world. And COVID actually handed us a big blessing and made us reinvent the whole model. And now we've really hit some, not hockey stick growth, but some pretty rapid growth since then.
Well, it's a pretty wild entrepreneurial story in that, you've got one of your customers who's like, actually, I've already gone and met your other customers and we want to get together and do this. So you should do this as a business. What a phenomenal way to get started.
Well, I think it aligns with what my core purpose is, right? My core purpose has always been to help entrepreneurs make their visions come true. Mm-hmm. And I remember standing in my home in Vancouver with Simon Sinek. And Simon had wrote the book, Start With Why. This was 4 years before he wrote the book. He had been on our board of advisors back in the 1-800-GOT-JUNK days. And so I was still at 1-800-GOT-JUNK, and he was asking me why I do what I do, kind of what's your start with why. And he was the one who really helped me figure it out, that the speaking that I was doing was helping entrepreneurs. The coaching that I was doing with franchisees was helping them. When I'd coached people in the college pro world, it was helping them. Everything I liked doing was helping entrepreneurs make their dreams or make their visions come true. So the COO Alliance just became a natural fit with that if I can help the COO grow their skills and their confidence and their connections, that helps the entrepreneur's vision come true. So, yeah.
I love that. It's great. People talk a little bit about personal purpose and what their purpose is and wanting to align it, with what they do for a living. You're literally you're the poster child for that.
So I had a mentor. Thank you. I had a mentor back in 2004 for 2 years. He was being groomed as the COO at Starbucks, and he was doing coaching calls with me every month for 2 years, and then in-person meetings every quarter for a full day. I'd either go down to the Starbucks head office or he would come up to the Vancouver head office. And when I left 1-800-GOT-JUNK in May of 2007, he had me take 4 months off. So I took all of the summer off, and I didn't do any lunches, didn't take any business calls, didn't check email for 3.5 months. And he had me journal every morning for 20 minutes a day. So I grabbed this black notebook at a bookstore, and I would sit down over coffee and I would just make lists. And I did mind maps and I did lifelines and I made lists of everything I liked and everything I hated and everything I was good at and everything I sucked at. I made lists of every project that I'd ever led at all of the different companies that I'd built. I made lists of all the problems I'd ever encountered, like literally lists and mind maps. The whole book was filled with all this. And at the end of the 4 months, I realized that the stuff I loved to do and the stuff I was really good at was fairly limited. And if I could build a business around those things and avoid everything else, I could be really happy. So that was the kind of starting point. I realized I loved coaching. I loved speaking. I loved networking and connecting with people. And that was pretty much it, and I didn't like a lot of other stuff in business that maybe I was good at, but it drained me of energy. So yeah, just stayed consistent.
It's interesting you speak about being good at something and draining your energy. I mean, this is like the sort of theory behind Marcus Buckingham's Strength Finder 2.0, right? Is, his belief is that, and I agree with him, is that the strength is something you're good at and adds energy to your life. And a weakness can be something you're good at and it takes energy away from your life.
Well, and the school system messed us up, right? We grew up in a time when if we were really bad at a subject, the school system or the teacher in their right way said, go get a tutor, get some after school help on that project and you'll get better. No, I just kept getting more frustrated because I sucked at it. Yeah. And if they had said, you know what, don't worry about any of that stuff. Find the 1 or 2 subjects you love. And why don't we tie it to subjects you're interested in? Like I used to love skiing. I was ski racing until I was 21. I was super passionate about ski racing. I was also really passionate about tennis, played competitive tennis. If they had said, let's work on the mathematics of tennis and skiing, the physics of the history of, like, let's look at geography and figure out where all the races are held. Like I would have been all in on learning any subject. Let's let me write creative writing, do poems about skiing. But all the stuff they made us do was around stuff we didn't care about. So it just drained us. And yeah, so I think the school system taught us for 18 years to try hard at what we're bad at. And now as entrepreneurs and even as COOs, we can start to delegate everything except genius. And in fact, the more that we do that, the more that we get everything off our plate, except the stuff we're really good at and gives us energy, then everything gets really simple. And we're really lucky now, especially with this global landscape of employees, that you can hire freelancers or fractional people or full-time people that don't have to live 20 minutes away from your office because they don't have to commute to work. They can be all over the world. And now you have these high-performing teams of people working on the stuff that they're really good at that fill them with energy. And they don't have to show up all the time in the middle of your office to take care of them.
I worry about, kids being told the story that they can, if they work hard enough, they can be anything they want. And I'm like, well, you could suck at a lot of it, actually, is what's true. Like, I don't think kids can be anything they want if they work really hard. I think what you're saying, I agree with, which is that you've got to try to figure out what your zone of genius is. There's some things you can uniquely do incredibly well. And the sooner you figure out what that is, the more you can double down on getting world class at those things. Because there's a lot of things that, that you just can't be good at. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. And I think that's where kids now are starting to recognize that. I mean, the school system is falling apart as we're sitting here doing our podcast. The post-secondary school system is falling apart almost as we speak, where kids are now recognizing that there's really no ROI on going to a post-secondary unless you're going to be a lawyer or a doctor or something so technically specific that they can learn information about what they want to work on so much faster online. Like I've got one of my sons right now is taking free classes up at UBC in the film industry because he's super passionate about film. And my other son has done a couple of internships, one over in London, England, one here in Vancouver. The one in Vancouver, he did a 4-month free internship. He said, don't pay me, but let me come and work for you for 4 months. Let me shadow each business area for 2 weeks and sit behind the scenes. So we got to work with a company called GrowRev and worked in sales, worked in marketing, worked in ops, worked in IT, worked in finance, and got to sit in on every business meeting that was happening. And they didn't pay him for the summer, but they got some output from him, but he got this amazing learning. That stuff really didn't happen when we were growing up, right? We had to be the smartest people in the room because we didn't have access to YouTube and Google and ChatGPT to figure it all out. But I think that's changing very quickly. And it's changing the workforce too. We have to hire people that can adapt and grow back in the day when, we were hiring people, we would hire them to do a job and they would do that same job for 3 to 5 years. Now, when you hire somebody, whatever you're hiring them for, that job has massively iterated and changed 6 months later. They have to be able to adapt or die.
That's literally happened in my business last 24 years. The people have basically created their own next opportunity in the company. They've come in to do a specific role, then realize what their zone of genius is that they didn't even know or wouldn't even have applied for a role like this. And yet they've seen the need in the company and they're like, I'm really passionate about this. I'm going to go devote myself to becoming world class at this thing. And then that becomes their developmental path that we can support as well.
Have you noticed that Gen Y right now, a big strength that they bring into the workforce is their ability, and they learned it gaming. They learned it playing video games online with friends all over the world, is the ability to collaborate and problem solve and kind of break up tasks and responsibilities. And they can kind of work asynchronously where they can actually be doing the job, but they're talking to other people. That's kind of the way that work is being done today versus the, head down, stay focused, do your work, hand it in at the end of the day, which is not how work is done today.
It's why I'm such a fan of kids doing team-based sports.
Yeah.
And I would call video gaming a team-based sport, right? Like, so anytime that that their success is tied to the core collaboration with others, and they can become incredibly good at whatever the thing is, but their true success is only going to be realized as a result of working with others that are equally as passionate about trying to create an outcome. It's really like, I don't think you can train that into an adult. I think if you're not wired that way when you're young, then you grow up with more of a lone wolf. Success is all about what I can produce personally. It's really hard for that person to get into any type of team environment. And it's really difficult when they become a leader.
You know what else is kind of becoming super important right now for people to adapt is leveraging AI, right? Mm-hmm. It was 25 years ago, we were starting to learn about leveraging the internet and dealing with Wi-Fi and using a laptop and, then using the tech stack and then using some small automations and then talking to our computer and letting it type for us. Now the ability to leverage AI and use AI in our role, that the only individuals that are at risk of being replaced by AI are the ones that don't use AI, right? If you're a person that comes up and is using these technologies to do more work, you're actually solidifying your role in the company. Or if you're a company that's looking to leverage AI, you're solidifying your future. But the people that are sitting back going, oh, I've always done it this way, you're out of a job. You're literally like, because someone will come in with a better, faster, leaner way to take your 30 years experience. And with their 3 years experience, they can kick your ass. And I think that's something that's happening now in the workforce.
If anybody's listening to this and thinking like, well, I just don't see how AI applies to my role, and I'm not sure it's actually going to be a big part of it. I'm like, it's literally, you're sitting there working on numbers for your company using a calculator, and somebody is going to show up with a spreadsheet.
I was in Kelowna, British Columbia this summer. And I was talking to the Uber driver, and he was complaining about giving 30% of his take to Uber. And I was like, dude, you're out of a job in 18 months, like 2 years. He's like, what do you mean? I said, well, autonomous driverless Ubers. And he goes, what? He never even heard of it. I was like, I was in a driverless vehicle in Scottsdale, Arizona last December. So 15 months ago. I showed him a video and his whole world just changed. He was like, A, that's really freaking cool. And B, holy shit, I need to go find another career. We can't sit on our laurels. But I think that's what's really exciting for Gen Y and this Gen Z cohort is they're used to adapting and changing. Mm-hmm. They're used to leveraging technology. Like my 2 kids are way better at using technology than I am. Just even in the way that they, run everything off a cell phone versus even needing to use a laptop for run a business.
Well, and it's interesting because I think like 80% of the searches are moving towards are mobile now. And so when you think about companies worried about what their website looks like on a computer, it's like, worry about what it looks like on a phone. That's where most people are actually experiencing your brand. I want to go back to something you said earlier around strengths and this issue, not this issue, but this opportunity for, CEOs and COOs to get super clear on what their strengths are so that they can ensure that they're working in their zone of genius on a regular basis. I'd love for you to differentiate. So like when you think about a CEO, and I know that each CEO will have their specific zones of genius, but I'm guessing you've narrowed it down to a point where you're like, yeah, but they all kind of got to be good at these sort of core set of things and they need to stay in their lane and they need to find a COO who can complement them. And the COO, this is the kind of things they need to be strong at to help to be successful in that business.
Okay, yes. So CEOs have to be good at vision, strategy, the people side of the business to some aspect, and culture, pretty much that's it, right? If they're really good at vision, strategy, culture, because they can delegate everything except genius. The COO absolutely has to be good at all the people sides of the business, right? The collaboration, the getting consensus, the having good debate, making sure that cross-functional teams are talking to each other, making sure the allocation of resources are strong. But what's really weird about the COO role is they have to be very good at whatever the CEO sucks at. We've got right now about 180 members of the COO Alliance from 17 countries, scaling that up to about 500 over the next year. I would have been a horrible COO for 98% of our members because I don't necessarily match the core values or the culture of their CEO, or I don't have any industry experience, or the stuff their CEO is really bad at, maybe I'm not good at, right? In 1-800-GOT-JUNK's case, Brian, who is the CEO, was very good at IT and was very good at finance. I wasn't, but I was really good at all the operational, the people, the culture, the sales, marketing, and PR. And that was the areas that I was able to then run with. Today, their current CEO, who's been their new CEO there, for 13 years. I've known him for 35. We started a fraternity together in Ottawa, Canada in 1987. Rick would have been a horrible COO for the first 7 years because he was too corporate. He was a bigger bit. He was great from the 100 million to the 800 million, but he was the wrong time, right? So even though he matched the person and still matched the areas, he also needed to match the size of the company that he was in. So the COO role is a really unique role. If you're the head of marketing for a SaaS company, you could probably be the head of marketing for any SaaS company. Right? If you're the head of finance for a mid-sized company, you could probably be the head of finance for a mid-sized company. The COO has to match the industry, the size of the organization, the culture of the CEO, and the areas of weakness. So it's a really tough role to fit.
It's interesting because I think, when I've thought about that role, it's felt more portable, right? Like somebody's been a chief operating officer in one company, they can move to another company. And I love their differentiation.
I joke about that using a traditional marriage, husband and wife. And if a guy's out looking for a wife, he's like, oh, you used to be married, you're a wife. Well, you could be my wife. No, just because someone has been someone else's wife doesn't mean she'd be good as your wife, right? Or vice versa.
Yeah.
And because you need to match the husband, you need to match the strengths of the husband, you need to match the communication style. So there's a lot going on there that is very different from hiring a gardener or hiring a landscaper or hiring a roofer. You're hiring your business spouse.
That's a good distinction, I think, for listeners to have, to understand that if they're looking to find a COO, if they're using EOS, they'd refer to that person as an integrator, that they're not just looking for somebody that has operational experience. They're looking for somebody that really is going to shore up their weaknesses, bring in strengths that they don't have strengths, and be both culturally and values aligned. Because if they're in conflict, if you've got your COO and your CEO in conflict, that's just going to go downstream through the whole organization.
Well, and there's always going to be conflict, but it needs to be healthy conflict for the good of the core values, for the good of the vision of the company, for the good of the plan that you're working towards. But the conflict needs to be done in a healthy way. It's kind of like a husband and wife, again, in traditional marriage. We need to have time to argue and fight. It's just going to happen. But try not to do it in front of the kids.
Yeah.
So try to remove yourself from the day-to-day and have a space where you can argue and debate. The COO and CEO shouldn't be arguing in front of the board. Right. They shouldn't be arguing in front of the rest of the leadership team, but they should have a space to be able to have conflict with each other for the good of the growth of the organization and do it in a healthy way.
I love that differentiation. It kind of speaks to the two different types of conflict, right? There's interpersonal conflict, which is two people are just going at each other because they're having issues with each other, versus ideological conflict, which is we care deeply about this business. We see it from different lenses. So we're in conflict because we want what's best. We just think what's best is different. And that's super productive and healthy for the two of them to be in. If they're in interpersonal conflict, that's what gives everybody the icks to witness and watch.
And it's funny, I've actually engaged a very, very high performance marriage counselor who still to this day does marriage counseling for a lot of the hedge fund Wall Street power executives and their spouses. She has done work for a number of CEOs and COOs on their interpersonal to teach them how to talk to each other, to teach them how to fight fair, to teach them how to see the other person's side, to teach them how to decide if they want to stay in the relationship or be right in the argument, right? And it's just a skill that people don't necessarily have, right? So it's like any area of business or any area of sport. If the best athletes on the world have coaches, and they have mindset coaches, fitness coaches, nutrition coaches, technical coaches. Well, then the CEO and COO need to have that kind of coaching too. You need to get coaching around your interpersonal, not just around marketing or around finance. Like you need to have a layer of expertise that helps you go to the next level. Brian and I keep going back. I left the company 18 years ago, but it's still a good reference point.
Yeah.
When he and I were really starting to take off with the organization, probably in our first year, we brought in a local counselor coach. Her name was Joan Mara. And Joan sat behind the scenes with Brian and I, helping us on our interpersonal relationships so that we didn't blow up the business while we were fighting and arguing. She taught us how to actually have that good debate with each other.
And Joan's phenomenal. She's a legend in the entrepreneurs organization.
Yep.
In fact, Joan was the person who 23 years ago, actually did my EO form training.
Yep, she did mine in 1995. I sat in her husband's office, John Mara's office at the Hong Kong Bank building in Vancouver.
I want to just jump back on something you said around the CEO and the skills the CEO needs to have. Because I want to add actually one skill that I've witnessed and I realized has been actually important in my journey as a CEO as well. So I agree with you, vision and strategy and the people culture side. Those three things are absolutely critical. There's a fourth skill that I've seen that I think is really important, which is the ability to do big deals. And I'm not talking about business development. I'm not talking about the regular sales funnel, your marketing flywheel, that you need to have that all set up in your business. But there are just certain partnerships and deals that two CEOs can get together and get done without all the red tape, without all the annoying pieces that are, and there are certain customers that are big enough and the deal is significant enough to that customer that they want to have a conversation with the CEO. And CEOs who have that ability to understand gray, have a complex worldview, and are able to sit across from somebody and figure out their needs and then your own company's needs to be able to put together what is going to be a long-term relationship and partnership with significant impact to both companies. I think that's a pretty critical skill for a CEO to bring to the table.
Yeah, and I think it's in many ways even more than a skill, and it's more of a DNA trait. I think most entrepreneurs recognize there is no box. Right? We have to be outside of the box. We're always because if there was already a playbook, everyone would be running the business for us. So we're able to kind of figure it all out. We want systems, but we also recognize that if there's no system, we're going to figure it out on our own. Right? So yeah, that deal making is part of that, I think, entrepreneurial DNA of just figuring it out. Right. Another one, I mean, there's lots, right? But another one is on the finance side. They definitely have to have a really good, fairly strong understanding of budgeting and cash flow. Maybe not in terms of the balance sheet, but they really do have to understand the basic economics of a business, at least to get you to a stage where you can then bring in a finance team. But we almost bankrupted 1-800-GOT-JUNK. Here I am again with the examples from 18 years ago. We almost bankrupted the company at $100 million in system-wide sales because we didn't understand how to leverage the balance sheet. We understood how to grow a mid-sized company, but not how to grow a large company. And we spent all of our profit. And then when we needed cash flow, the bank wouldn't lend to us. And we're like, why? Well, yeah.
When you don't need money, banks are super happy to extend your credit line, give you money.
We spent $5 million in the course of 4 months on an office renovation, moving into 3 floors of the Guinness Tower, putting in a glass stairway, bonuses, taxes. So we spent the $5 million and we're like, that's amazing. But then we needed money for cash flow because we were just finishing the winter season. So we needed like maybe about 6 weeks until we got to some of our max earning again. And the bank said, no, you don't have any money. And we're like, yeah, we were proud about what we just spent it on. And they said, if you'd come to us 3 months ago wanting to borrow $5 million, we would have said yes.
Right.
We're like, but we didn't need it.
Right.
Like, we just didn't understand, The best
advice I was ever given was around the financial side, to make it as simple as possible. It was probably, 20 years ago. The advice was, cash or revenue is vanity, profit is sanity, but cash flow is oxygen.
Yeah. Vern Harnish.
Yeah. And if you don't have that locked in, the understanding that cash flow allows you to fix a lot of things. You got cash flow and you have a profitability problem, you can go work on your profitability problem. Your sales have slumped, you can go work on your sales. But when you don't have cash, it's effectively over.
Yeah. Well, and your need for cash changes as the organization scales. When you're small, you can borrow, you can max out a credit card, you don't pay a few suppliers for a month or two, whatever. As you get bigger, you can't do that. You really do need to have that oxygen. It's like scuba diving. The deeper you go, the more compressed that oxygen is. You take one
Yeah.
big gulp at 140 feet, and you're almost out of air.
Right.
You take one big gulp at the surface, there's lots of air available, right?
Right.
Yeah.
That's a great analogy.
But
It's interesting because the cash flow piece of it, like, when you think about, as you say, CEOs needing to understand cash flow, even if they've got a controller, a CFO, it's still their responsibility to have a clear understanding of the financial metrics and what makes that business actually tick.
yeah,
And what are the drivers of cash? Because one of their key roles is to be strategically looking for the next river of cash to bring into the company, as part of their strategic vision and their overall vision for the organization. And if they don't have a handle on like how the business generates cash, not just how it generates revenue or what profitability metrics are, but like what is your cash conversion cycle? Like, do you understand your long-term cash flow? Do you understand what impacts your cash flow? Because when those things go sideways, what I've noticed, I've been in my forum group for years now. And what I've noticed is it doesn't matter what size your payroll is or what your cash flow issue is. When you have a cash flow issue, if you have $1 million cash flow issue, or you have $100,000 cash flow issue, you have a $5 million cash flow issue, you have a cash flow issue. The numbers are a little bit immaterial. As you say, it does get a little bit more challenging when the numbers get bigger. When they get big enough, it's actually the bank's problem. But before you get to it being big enough that it's the bank's problem, it's your problem as the CEO to be aware of, to ensure you don't get in that scenario, and have a plan to get yourself out of it if you do get into it.
well, funny you mentioned the bank's problem. I'm not going to disclose the name, but one of my forum members back around 1998 or 99 was the biggest credit line or credit facility that his bank on the North Shore of Vancouver had. And the bank said, we need you to move. There's nothing wrong with your business, but you're too big of a risk for us, even though you're growing quite nicely. And he's like, where the fuck do I go? What do you mean? Like everything's going well, but I'm too big for you? They're like, how does this even work? Right. Yeah, they didn't want the risk.
And so when a company, when a CEO is getting to that place where they realize the growth of their business, they've got too many hats. They're wearing too many hats in the business, and they're like, I need somebody between me and like most of the things that are happening in the business. Like, what's the triggering moment that usually happens when they go down that road?
Well, that's usually the signal that you really need to hire a second in command, like a true COO, is when you recognize that you have no time to work on the stuff you're good at, to work on the stuff that you love doing, or that you have no time to be strategic, you have no time to think about vision and culture, and you really have no time to grow and support people. And by growing and supporting people, it's sitting down with them, spending time with them, understanding what they're working on, thinking about the idiosyncrasies in the business and their direct reports. Most CEOs don't have the time for that, or they don't have the skills to do that. So that's really when you can leverage up and get a second command in who can grow people. When I came into 1-800-GOT-JUNK, not only did I build from scratch the marketing team, the sales team, the PR team, the operations team, the franchise coaching, all the franchise systems, I also put in place the leadership development program to train anyone who managed people on the soft skills so that they could take on more responsibility. Brian didn't have the skills to do that. And it wasn't a negative for him. He'd never done it before, but he really understood the finance of the business, and he understood the culture of the industry, and he understood the software that we were building. So we just kind of divided and conquered. But he saw that as a big, well, he actually didn't even know that it was a big block. He just recognized he didn't know how to scale a franchise company. And when I came in and showed him the plan, he's like, I don't know how to do this stuff. So I was originally going to coach him on doing it. And then he said, can you just do it for me? Right. And I think that's a big opportunity for entrepreneurial organizations. When you can afford it, is bring on either a fractional or a full-time person, and they'll probably generate 3 to 4x what you're paying them annually in terms of incremental gross margin in their first year. That usually is what can happen.
So then from that perspective, you almost want to start as soon as possible if they're going to effectively cover their own costs, right?
Well, yeah. And so here's another stumbling block that people have. Let's say you're going to hire a $250,000 COO or a vice president of operations. People, oh my God, $250,000, I can't afford that. You're not giving them that money tomorrow.
Right.
Like let's say it's $20,000 a month for 12 months. That's $240,000. So it's really $20,000 you have to worry about. And you're not even giving them $20,000 right now. You're giving them $10,000
for this
for
paycheck.
2 weeks. And $10,000, right? So it's really $5,000 a week.
Right.
It's actually $1,000 a day.
Yeah.
So what could that COO do to generate $4,000 in incremental gross margin? Well, there's lots of stuff they could do. They could probably
Yeah.
fire somebody. They could
Yeah.
probably put a deal in place. They could probably train people. They could probably remove complexity. They could probably, so it's those things that when an entrepreneur wraps their head around it, and when you get them managing that part of the business, it frees up you to be a rainmaker or to put the deals in place or to, so now you really have that partner.
Whenever we talk to CEOs about their, what's their top three, and they're like, well, what do you mean? I'm like, well, like, what are the top three things? Like, because I'll see they're doing this, right? They've got a lot of direct reports. They don't have a COO in place. And I'm like, well, who reports to you? And then they list off like 9 people. Like,
Yeah.
okay. And you do one-on-ones for these 9 people? Well, not really. I'm like, okay, so how frequently do you actually get a chance to meet with them? Like maybe once a month ish.
Yeah.
Right. And yeah, ish. And then they're busy. Like they've got a full calendar, let alone needing to keep track of these 9 people that report to them. And my first question is always like, what are the 3 things that you do that uniquely only you can do in the business? And most of them can name those 3 things pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Like they're able to say, well, if it's a real estate development, they'll say land deals. I can do land deals because I just know, I know all the players in the space and I can do those deals really well. Okay, cool. What's the other thing? Banks and funding partners. Yeah, I get it. You're real estate. You got to bring in investment. You got a relationship with the banks. You got a relationship with a lot of investors that trust you, not your brand. Yeah, I can do that really well. Okay, cool. So then like, what's the third thing? Yeah, vision and strategy. Like I have a really clear idea of where I want this business to go. And I'm like, okay, that sounds great. Nothing else matters that you do. Those 3 things you're uniquely good at. I could argue you could probably hire a head of development that could take over the piece about land banking and doing deals. Like that part, actually, you could probably find somebody in your space because I know those people exist. But the other 2 things, yeah, you probably need to hold on to those things. And so let's go figure out how you're going to get rid of all of that. And I usually, met with a blank stare because they're like, well, but I get like all these people report to me and like they can't though. Like they just can't. You need a president or a COO that all those people report to, except maybe the ones that are directly involved in the things that you and I just talked about. And that person is going to take all of the day-to-day stuff that you're probably good at a lot. You might suck at a bunch of it and you hate doing it, but you get it done because you're like, I just have to do this. And there's probably a bunch of stuff that you're, back to our Strength Finders conversation earlier in this podcast, like you're good at these things, but they really suck energy from your life, right? And then there's these few things, like 3 things that you do uniquely well that add energy to your life, feel, somewhat effortless, but you still put a lot of effort into them. They carry a lot of leverage and there's nobody else that could do those things. And if you could just do those things and you did more of those and you actually had the white space to be thoughtful about those 3 roles, like you weren't just back-to-back meetings all the time, what would be possible with the growth and scaling of your organization? And most have never thought about it in that context before.
Well, it's because they're too busy in the day-to-day. They're too busy being busy versus ability to slow it down and to be able to think. And that is a huge opportunity for them. It's funny you even mentioned doing one-on-ones. Most leaders do one-on-ones with no training on how to do proper one-on-ones.
Yeah.
It's like most leaders hire people, they do interviews, but they've never been trained on how to do proper interviews.
Well, I want to go to one-on-one. Tell me your format. Like what's your favorite one-on-one format that you've seen has been the most successful? Because I know you've got such significant people development experience. So you've honed it to a point now where you know this is going to move the dial for this person.
I got trained in a system back in 1990 called GSNR, which stood for Goal Setting and Review. But we really kind of looked at flipping the org chart upside down, where my job was to support my direct reports, not tell them what to do. So if I'm there to support them, it means I'm using a balance of situational leadership and coaching to help grow their skills or their confidence on each of the projects that they're working on. So my typical one-on-one, if I had a 30-minute one-on-one with a direct report, the first thing, and I actually cover this in my Invest in Your Leaders training. So the first thing I do is what I call the head check. It's just like, how are you doing? And actually giving a shit, like really caring about them in their personal lives and in their day-to-day and in their business life is how are they doing? And sometimes you cancel the meeting because they're just not doing well and they need to take some time and free up. But when a leader thinks about them and cares about them, it kind of settles them into the conversation. Then the only thing we're looking at is any of the core projects that are on their plate that are yellow or red. If their projects are green, if they're going well, I don't even ask, I don't follow up, I don't need an update. But anything that's yellow or red, do they need any help with that? Where are they struggling with those things? Can they get any support, right? Do they need coaching? Do they need some problem solving? Do they need some direction? And then we look at their core metrics. So what's the stuff that's on their plate that they're responsible for? And we only look at the metrics that are yellow or red so that we can kind of lift up the hood and dig in a little bit deeper. And then we go through any of the issue clearing that they have. So they go through their list of stuff. And instead of them sending me Slack messages or DMs or emails throughout the week, they add a bunch of stuff to talk to me about to a list, and I do the same. And by the time they come in with their 8 items, they're like, yeah, that was dumb. That was stupid. This solved itself. Oh, here's a question. And then I tend to not give them the answer to the question. I tend to help them with their thinking so that they can solve their question. Because my job is to grow their confidence and skills to do more, not to solve their problems for them.
And that's that's coaching, right? I mean,
yeah.
you literally just described what coaching looks like for a leader in an
Correct.
organization.
But again, most CEOs and almost no CEOs have ever had any proper training on how to coach and how to delegate and how to manage projects and how to use situational leadership. So all they're doing is following up and micromanaging and asking questions, which drives everybody crazy.
Yeah.
And then even if you're trying to support, if you don't know how to do proper coaching, if you don't know how to use the Socratic method, if you don't realize that your job is to grow the skills and the confidence and the connections of your people, then you're constantly giving them the answers. That's not growing their skills and confidence. So that, and I cover a lot of that again in my Invest in Your Leaders training, but that's the stuff that we work on our members of the COO Alliance about as well, is how do we go back into our companies to grow our people versus giving them the answers and giving them the systems.
If you're sitting back listening to this right now and you're like, man, I do that. I problem solve for people all day long. That's my go-to, makes me feel good. I would say, the best book that I've read to help get out of that place is called The Coaching Habit by Michael Bungay-Stanier, who's been on the podcast recently. And that's the best-selling coaching book in like the last 100 years. And it literally helps people get out of that problem-solving mindset.
And the other one is The 1 Minute Manager by Ken Blanchard.
Right.
40 years old, still one of the best books in the world on coaching and on leveraging situational leadership. It's about a 2-hour read. But I'll give you here's a specific scenario that people will resonate with. It's when the employee comes to your door or sends you a quick email or a quick message saying, hey, do you have a minute?
Right.
Right. We tend to say yes. So what I tend to do is I'll be like, what's up? And they say, well, what do you think I should do about this? I'll be like, well, what do you think I should do about that?
Right.
Or do you know how to solve this? Well, do you know how to solve that? So I just kind of mirror it back to them and they go, well, I don't know what to do. Well, then go away and think about it and come back and tell me what you think we should do. So I make them go away and think. Then they come back and they go, okay, I thought about it. I think we should do this. And I'll be like, well, then do that. And after a while, they just stop coming for permission or they stop coming for the advice. Now, if they come back and they go, hey, I went away and thought about it. I still don't know how to solve it. Okay, show me what you were thinking. Show me how you were trying to solve it. Let me see what your thought process is. Okay, here's how I might have approached it. And you show them what your thinking might be. So you're, again, growing their skills, but you're kind of meeting them in the middle. But you resist the urge to just quickly solve their problem and make them go away. So years ago, I had my 13-year-old came to me. I was at home and he said, hey, Dad, can you make me an egg? It was like 12 o'clock. I'm like, sure, I'll make you an egg. So I walk into the kitchen. I go, grab 2 eggs out of the fridge. He goes, I only want 1. I go, I know. I'm making you an egg. You're making me an egg. And then I go, grab a frying pan, grab the butter. And I literally told him step by step. The only thing I showed him how to do was how to crack an egg. I made him crack the second one. And afterwards, he fried both the eggs, put the eggs on the plates, washed the pan. We sat down and ate it together. And he was kind of laughing the whole time going, God, like, I can't believe I just made my own eggs. The next day I walk into the kitchen. I'm like, what are you doing? He goes, I'm making an omelet. I'm like, where'd you learn how to do that? He goes, I looked it up on Google. I knew you weren't going to do it for me. Boom. That's mission accomplished, right? Yeah. My job is not to make my kids food every day. Yeah. It's to and that's what leaders have to get better at, but most never spend the time to think about it.
What I love about your one-on-one approach is having that shared document. What I found with the shared document is that it is, as you say, a great place for me to dump my thoughts, getting ready for their one-on-one. I know they're building their agenda. They're putting the things on there that make more sense for us to have some time on versus just flipping me a Slack message. What I find is that they're putting their things on there. I get a sense of where they're at before the one-on-one even starts. I've read what they want to talk about. They've seen what I want to talk about. And then sometimes I just actually go and I'll just put something in brackets and say, like, they just have a question from him, like, here's the answer to that question. Or it's a decision that they just need approval on or something like that. And I can very quickly do that so that when we get into the meat of the one-on-one, a lot of these things actually get solved. And it's just because there's this shared document in this place to go to. And I feel so much better going into a meeting knowing that I understand the context before I even ask them the question, like, how are you doing? Like, how are you really doing? And they tell me, I already see kind of where their brain is at and what's going on. And so I know it puts me in the right kind of coaching mindset. I can usually just tell looking at the agenda whether or not somebody's overwhelmed. Like, again, like, okay, this person is overwhelmed. I can literally see by the things they put on this page.
And if they feel safe enough to say that they're overwhelmed, right? If you create an environment like a no blame environment where people don't fail, systems fail, and they can kind of put their hand up and go, I'm overwhelmed. You go, cool, show me what you're working on. Show me what's driving you crazy. Let's see if I can help you. Can we delegate a couple things? Can we kill a couple projects? Can we brainstorm a couple? Can we automate a couple? Can we delay a couple? But if my job is to help you with the skills and the confidence and the connections, some of that is to help you not be overwhelmed. But I'm not going to be frustrated with you. Where I'll get frustrated is if you don't tell me you're overwhelmed, and then I find out you've been dropping the balls or hiding it versus saying, I don't know what the fuck I'm doing, or I need help with something.
I love that you're calling out the vulnerability and authenticity of people coming forward and just knowing that the one-on-one is there to help them, right? Like, as the CEO or as the leader, the one-on-one is really not for you, right? Like, it's not for you. You're there to act in service of your direct report and to support whatever their needs are at that point. Because any of the stuck points or roadblocks that are holding them back means they're not doing the most effective job they could be doing in the organization. And our job as the leader is to, make sure they have the resources, get those roadblocks out of their way, get those stuck points out of the way, provide really effective coaching and not just problem solving, and understand that the time is for them to use in the most effective way possible. And I love that you give them permission for people to be like, you know what? The most effective thing we could do today is for me to tell you I'm feeling overwhelmed and I don't want to do a one-on-one today. What I need is these 45 minutes back to go in my life to go out for a walk. Because if I just get outside today, I'd feel 100 times better. And I think I can tackle the rest. Cool. One-on-one's over.
Yeah.
We're done.
I had a CEO that I was coaching. His name is Dr. Jack from Los Angeles. Do that with me. I was going through a divorce, and he recognized that I was really struggling. And in the first 5 minutes of the call, he said, do you want to move this off a couple of weeks? Because you're really kind of messed up right now. And I think you need, I'm like, dude, do you mind? He goes, Cameron, I've been there, man. Go decompress. And I was so thankful that I had this space with, and again, I think that's the vulnerability in that shared space, right? Why force something? Why push something if that's not really you're not going to get the result by pushing it anyway.
I've got one last question for you. I cannot have you on a podcast and not talk about the fact that you and your wife, Ashley, are digital nomads. I mean, in the last, so let me get the numbers right. If I got these numbers correct, tell me. The last 43 months, you've been to 58 countries.
Yeah. And some of them 6 or 7 times,
which is like unbelievably remarkable. I mean, we're on Instagram together. We're friends. I see where you are. And when you told me that stat before we got started today, I'm like, I know what you've been up to the last 43 months, and I did not track that amount of travel. And I guess what I'd love to know is, having done that now, having spent 43 months visiting 58 countries multiple times, like 6, 7 times to some of these places. There's probably people listening who are like, I could never do that. Like, I have no idea. I couldn't even envision that. What would you say to them that you've learned about the digital nomad life in this journey you've been on over the last 43 months that Ashley and you decided to do?
Sure. So I'll give you the glass half full and the glass half empty.
Amazing.
And I guess the starting point is we sold everything to allow ourselves to have the freedom to go anywhere. So we have no houses anymore, no cars anymore, no furniture, no overhead or debt, right? So it's
all
not
your
like
chattels are gone.
Right. So it's not like I have to rent my home out or I'm already paying a mortgage. Like, I got nothing, right?
Yeah.
So my Airbnbs and hotels used to be mortgages and insurance and maintenance and property taxes.
Right.
My car rental or car leases and gas and insurance is now Uber and Lime scooters, right? So there's an offset in terms of cost. The upside is pretty much every day I'm aware of wonder. Pretty much every day I'm sitting going, wow, this view is cool, or this neighborhood is really neat, or I found, like today, I found a really cool new coffee shop, and I'm even in Vancouver, but I'm staying in a different area than I've ever stayed in before. That I found a new coffee shop, and so there's something cool about that, and going to all these countries and bucket list opportunities and fun festivals and amazing places. That's been really cool. The hard stuff has been over 43 months. We've been in about 120 Airbnbs. So it means you got to find 120 Airbnbs, book them, find 120 gyms, find 120 grocery stores, find 120 coffee shops, find 120 trainers, meet a couple, find a good pizza place, find a cool place you like to, and then pack up and leave again. So there's this constant churn of packing and going that is very draining and very hard. We didn't realize how hard it was on both of us until about 3 years in. And so we're starting to try to slow it down a fair bit this year, where we're going to be in places for a little bit longer and not feeling the need to go and say yes to everything. Last year we did 13 mastermind events or festivals that we went to. That's a lot, right? On top of the normal, it was like a big drug and then a crash afterwards, another big drug and a crash afterwards. So we're recognizing how to kind of slow that part of the travel down. There's lots of learnings.
That's a really powerful learning. And it was echoed by a mutual friend of ours, Taki Moore.
I saw Taki 6 weeks ago in Sydney, Australia. We went for a walk together in Manly. Yeah,
we went. I was just with him 2 weeks ago in Del Mar, California, actually, for the MMT conference. Yeah.
Taki and I were hanging out, went for dumplings together, but that's an upside for me. Is true. Taki had walked this stretch of Manly all the time, and I'm taking photos. And meanwhile, he's like walking barefoot, taking me to his dumpling place, right?
It's interesting because I asked him, because he did 3.5 years with his wife and 6 kids, and they were digital nomads. And I said to him, because he was saying all the wonderful things for the kids and the experiences as a family for the 8 of them. And I'm like, was there any drawback to doing that? He's like, yeah, you know what? We would be as a family and we'd start to get into a groove in a place and we'd really fall in love with the place. We really love that pizza place and that coffee shop was so great. And the people were so nice there. And then all of a sudden we're like, you know what? We're going to go to the next place now. And we started missing some of the places that we'd been and kind of thinking we really want to go back and be there for a bit, actually feel like we can enjoy and not be always thinking about, okay, well, we're only here for this short time. We got to do as much as possible and we're off to the next place. So he shared a similar story of his 3.5-year journey with his family traveling around the world.
Yep. I just sent him a screenshot of us talking right now.
Great.
If anyone's listening, Mike and I are actually talking over Riverside over video.
Yeah.
I just sent a video.
Some people are watching this on YouTube, so they'll actually see it on YouTube too.
But that's one of the hard things, right? But again, the upside is the chance to see everybody and connect with people and have these really, I can pretty much go to certainly any major city in the world. And I know a handful of people that I can hang out with and do some cool stuff with. And that's pretty neat. So
I love that. Cameron, thanks, man. I really appreciate you making time to have this conversation today. We're going to drop links to COO Alliance, all those things in the show notes, so people will get a chance to check you out. Check out your course as well for COOs who are interested in leveling up their leadership game. And thanks for making the time, bud.
Of course, Mike. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.